I've been having nightmares. The last few weeks, my nightmares have included the following things: AI agents and post-install scripts. Now, what I'm experiencing today in real life is some combination of the two. Update to Gemini CLI and run Gemini CLI Trust Model because of a 10.0 CVSS CVE in Gemini CLI. The combination of my two nightmares has manifested in real life, and I'm not sure how to feel about it. Let me be very clear. I think that using AI to do PR code review is actually a very good thing. Using AI assisted tooling to look at PRs and give a summary of the change is actually a really good way to reduce the amount of debt that people have to deal with. However, if you use those tools in a wrong way, or if those tools have a vulnerability, that's where the entire castle comes crashing down. For example, big organization, Red Hat, they're actively right now using a workflow that does a PR review using Gemini to review the pull request that somebody submits. Again, a good thing. But what happens if there's a vulnerability inside of Gemini? To do a pull request in CI, at the end of the day, you have to be using the Gemini CLI or the Run Gemini CLI workflow that already exists. The problem with these is to use them in a headless mode, to use them in a way that you can use in a CI/CD deployment, they have to run in YOLO mode. YOLO mode is literally the mode that allows you to run arbitrary commands on the system, which again is by design when you're doing Gemini CLI in CI/CD. It has to run this way so that the CLI can run arbitrary tooling, which is fine if you explicitly enable -- YOLO. But what happens if your pull request includes a malicious Gemini settings.json? Settings.json is a very normal, very benign JSON file that configures your agent. You enter Vim mode. Maybe you want to use the GitHub theme because you hate yourself. Maybe you want to run a set of tools inside the Docker sandbox. Wow, the tools option allows you to run in a sandbox. That's incredible. But in classic tooling fashion, there is a hook. And the hook comes in a variety of forms. One of them is before tool, but the other is before agent, which means after the user submits the prompt, but before planning, before any AI agent is run, it will run a before agent hook. And that hook can be a command. It can be a command named security check that arbitrarily runs any command on the system, which again, is fine if you, as the author of the code, are the one that's authoring the command. But here's the big issue. When you do a pull request, guess who controls the code? You, potentially you, but more importantly, the hacker, right? The evil person is in charge of the code. So what could happen here, again, before they fix this vulnerability, is a hacker could submit a malicious pull request, and then a GitHub workflow would fire. And again, this is literally just Red Hat. I'm using them as an example. They didn't get hacked. I'm just showing you that workflows like this do exist. You can submit a pull request. The pull request workflow, the Gemini PR review will run. And again, this is a pull request target if they get opened. So it'll run on open, and then you will fire the PR pull request review using Gemini. But the issue is, up until this was patched, you were able to run any arbitrary commands within the context of Gemini settings.json, which would run inside of the CI/CD runner as the organization, which means that by getting arbitrary code execution inside of the CI/CD runner, you can potentially extract their tokens, their API keys, anything that was living inside of the environment that your payload was running in. Now, continuing on the theme of nightmares, let's talk about Team PCP. If you're not aware, Team PCP is the threat actor that is behind a majority of the large-scale supply chain attacks that have been happening for the last couple of months. These include Light LLM, these include Trivy tool, this includes the Checksmarks tool, which is a software composition analysis tool, right? A software security tool, and apparently Telnix, another one that I haven't heard of. These all originally were derived from some compromise of CI/CD, right? Again, it's this weird pattern where companies are using good development tooling, they're using good security practices, and because they're using them, a bad assumption about the way that we're using them is causing huge downstream effects. Now, I'm not saying that this tool is the reason why these exploits happen. I'm not saying that Team PCP exploited vulnerability in Gemini CLI. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying, though, is this reliance on CI/CD, which likely now includes AI tooling with settings files that are not properly sanitized, is a large-scale pattern that we're seeing, which could be enabling actors to do this kind of compromise, right? Again, we all of these hacks have something to do with a compromised CI/CD pipeline or the use of a compromised CI/CD action, right? I think the Trivia action got compromised, which caused the LLM compromise, for example. Or I think the Axios compromise, right? The compromise of the Axios workflow was done because Axios used the checksmarks tool under the hood. In March of this year, Team PCP leveraged an attack that took advantage of an Aquabot service that allowed them to compromise the Trivia action repository. Following that, also in March, Aqua Security Trivia, which was compromised by Team PCP, that was able to use some vulnerability in their GitHub action to compromise their GitHub action in Kix and AST, which eventually led to downstream effects. Now, it's very important to highlight that the way that CI/CD works under the hood is when a payload is getting ran by the CI/CD, there has to be a runner that runs it. Now, a lot of the runners are ran by GitHub, right? By default, when you run a workflow in GitHub, it is a GitHub hosted runner for you. But it's also very common for large companies or companies that want to have like a certain kind of thing run on the runner to run a self-hosted runner. The payload will get picked up by a local binary on your infrastructure, and it'll pull it down and run the workflow on your behalf, right? This is a very common thing to do. Now, the issue with this, again, is if you design your work stream around the fact that the code running in your runners is trusted, and this kind of exploit, the Gemini CLI bug gets exploited where now they have code execution in your runner. If you don't properly protect the data or expose trusted data inside of those runners, you're gonna have a bad time. Your API keys could get picked up. Your environment variables for other processes that are at the same privilege level that contain things like database credentials or API credentials could also get compromised. For those of you watching this, you may be asking like, what do I do about this, right? What do I do with this pattern of supply chain getting attacked and Gemini CLI and potentially other tools being used in this way that could be malicious by a threat actor when they're doing a pull request, right? Ultimately, I think the only correct response to this is you have to assume everything is compromised, right? Assume that what you're doing is going to lead to a compromise in some capacity. And as a result, if someone were to land in a place like your local GitHub runner, or if someone were to land in your pull request environment that is maybe cloud hosted, what about that could lead to a further compromise, right? Like if you're running a self-hosted runner, do you expose any interesting credentials and other processes that run at the same level as that runner? If that's the case, use the Linux user scheme, use the Linux permission model, and create new users for those processes so that maybe they can't run forever, so that they can't run and steal your credentials. Also, use proper sandboxing. Like I'm hoping that if you are doing self-hosted runners, you're also using Docker or something similar that prevents a compromise from getting outside of that local, basically root jail that Docker sets up. Now, if you're running Docker containers as root, that's a whole other conversation that we should have about you not doing that in the future. But ultimately, that's where this goes, right? Pretend that everything is compromised. If something gets compromised, what are you going to do about it? Also worth noting that Google did submit mitigations for this. So I think what happened is they made a new flag where Gemini Trust Workspace is not enabled by default. So if your workspace genuinely does run only on PRs from trusted collaborators, you can turn on Gemini Trust Workspace, bada bing, bada boom, and it's all good. Otherwise, you need to use the new version of the Google GitHub Actions Run Gemini CLI workflow that in versions 3.9.1 and 40.0 Preview 3 basically don't trust the workflow settings by default. And it's important to note that some people do pin specifically to a certain Gemini CLI version. You need to up that pin to actually get the new version, because every version before these versions was actually affected by this, which is worth noting. So definitely go update your CI/CD workflows if you haven't already. Anyway, guys, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Hello, BD Morgan. If you're new here, hit that sub button. I really appreciate it. And then go check out this other video about a similar supply chain attack that I think you will also enjoy. We'll see you over there. Take care. Goodbye.